Administrative law, I have a simulation where we take Jurassic Park as the set of facts for the class. We pretend that it's real, and they have the book. They read the novel in the first 2 weeks of class, and then I divide the class into groups. And the groups are responsible for everything related to the group. So the policy team is even responsible for teaching the class. The chapter in the casebook on policy, they sit up here and they teach it. They can teach it in any way they want. They don't have to stand and lecture. They can use problems. They can have their own simulations. They become the experts in the class also for that, and they all work to put together a regulatory scheme to handle the problems of Jurassic Park, which these days are pretty complex given everything that's going on in sort of biogenetics, and they have to get a handle on the regulatory landscape that already exists. They ultimately come up with a statute. It's never pretty. Sometimes they throw 3 and 4 boards in there. It's something that won't work. But what I love about the class is they learn a lot about the structure of regulatory agencies, which in the typical administrative law class, you're just learning bits and pieces. You never see the whole statute. And here in this class, they're going to major statutes that they think are analogs for the statute they want to produce, like the Nuclear Regulatory Act. They usually go to the Nuclear Regulatory Act. If a nuclear reactor is is burning out in the city, that's kind of like a T-Rex running around and eating everybody up. What I've started to do in this class is tell them, at some point in your legislation, you must address an ethical issue. It can be whatever you want. You can set up practice rules before the agency. There are some models for that. You can find any bit of ethical administrative law practice and deal with that. Last spring when I taught it, they came up with conflict of interest provisions for the statute. What they said is, in this area of sort of dinosaur DNA research, there aren't going to be many players. The government, especially under maybe a more conservative administration, is going to be plucking people out of the industry to regulate the industry. This allows us to talk about probably the biggest ethical issue in administrative law, which is agency capture by corporations. And so the students came up with these fairly complex conflict provisions. Now I won't read, they file then student reports where I get them to explain why they did what they did. In this case, they talk about how they came up with the conflict of interest rules they did. Interestingly, here at the bottom, we upped the punishment for certain violations in order to deter government conduct. Thinking about the role of sovereign immunity and the inability to sue federal officials under the court's doctrinal limitations to Bivens actions, we thought it important to deter misconduct as much as possible, considering the risk posed by this novel industry or field. That's the kind of work they are doing in these classes. That's the kind of sophisticated thinking they're doing that you don't typically get in a traditional class.